apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. Well, it was another terror weekend, and we're going to spend some time talking not only about this and the fact that they now have captured this suspect after a shootout with him and a number of other issues, but even talk a little bit about the way in which this is covered, because it is amazing to me, as this is unfolded over the weekend, how there is still an unwillingness on the part of so many people in various positions of authority to say what we all know this is, and this is another terrorist attack. And it was from individuals. Maybe they are indeed lone wolves. There were those who were even wondering whether these were separate incidents. And I would have to say what happened in Minnesota obviously is separate from what happened in New York and New Jersey. And we understand all of that. But the point is that it is put together with a common ideology. So I'd love to get some of your thoughts on that. And just to maybe start off, a couple of the pieces we've posted here were very helpful. One by the Wall Street Journal, which referred to it as a terror weekend. The brief respite from terrorist attacks on American soil, they say, ended abruptly on the weekend with a knife assault at a shopping mall. I'm going to get into more of that in just a minute, in Minnesota, as well as bombings in New Jersey and New York, and other bombs that did not go off, or when they were being dismantled went off. Talk about that in just a minute. It's a miracle no one was killed. But the timing and nature of the attacks, they say, rightly have investigators looking for evidence of Islamist or other terrorist links. Now, of course, this was written yesterday. We now indeed have a suspect, which I'll talk more about in just a minute. But I thought it was kind of interesting, because if you look at the way it was covered in the later in the article, they point out that the New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio couldn't even muster the word terrorism, they said, oddly preferring intentional act. Nonetheless, laid on another 1,000 police and security officers for duty during the United Nations session. Mr. de Blasio has been among those decrying the New York police anti-terror surveillance that has helped keep the city safe since 9/11. So you see that. A little different perspective is that when you had, after the explosion, the New York governor, Andrew Cuomo, saying it was obviously an act of terrorism. So even there you have different situations in which those who are in authority can't bring themselves sometimes to describe what it is. And this is what I think all of us know that it is. The police also found what had the look of another improvised explosive device not far from the bombing site. The device contained a pressure cooker and a cell phone that might have served as a trigger. You might remember the Sarnoff brothers used pressure cookers at the Boston Marathon bombing, and so you have all of that on there as well. So that's one of the articles we posted from the weekend. But this has been one of those stories that has continued on, and now the suspect that they've been looking for, they have been able to capture after trading gunfire with him. The suspect pulled out a gun, fired at the officer, striking him in the abdomen. The gentleman got up and started walking down the street in a westerly direction. I'm told that he was randomly discharging his fire gun, and one of the officers was able to get close enough to him and return fire. Then, of course, we have the story of him actually being now taken in an ambulance. And one of the things that helped them begin to identify this individual, and I guess we could say his name Ramami, was the fact that they have now, and they've even posted this, pictures of him in the two locations where there were packages, and also they apparently have fingerprints on some of the parts of the devices. And of course, when one does not go off, you have a lot more to work with than when all of them go off. So you can begin to see that this is the case. And again, you have a device exploded on West 23rd and 7th Avenue, injuring 29 people. The unexploded exploded device actually was a few blocks away on West 27th Street. So this is kind of what has unfolded in the last couple of hours. And I thought there was a very good piece that came out in National Review, which asked, I think, a very good question. Why place 2 bombs in the Chelsea neighborhood? This is one of the neighborhoods in the New York area, as you might know. And Jim Garrity said it's extremely unlikely that 2 separate perpetrators acting independently would place 2 explosive devices 4 blocks apart. Of course, we now know it's one individual. New York City is facing an individual or group who set 2 explosive devices intending to harm an individual. Of course, we know all of that as well. But he says the bomber's location for his bomb says a great deal about him. In the immediate days after the Boston Marathon bombing in 2013, some speculated whether it could be the work of militias because the date, April 15th, was close to tax day and the anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing, April 19th. But militias are primarily angry at the federal government. Blowing up a marathon doesn't make a lot of sense as a target. The Boston Marathon made more sense if you were targeting America or Americans as a whole, and it made more sense if the bomber was local. The Boston Marathon is a huge event in that city and region, but less so on the national stage. And as it turned out, the perpetrators were indeed both locals, I should say, who embraced jihadist ideology. They had previously contemplated suicide attacks on the crowds for the Boston Pops fireworks display on the 4th of July. The bomber here in New York presumably could have left his pressure cooker bombs closer to other sites that would have been more symbolic. Times Square, the Empire State Building, or Ground Zero Memorial. However, all those sites would have had more visible police presence and perhaps in the bomber's mind a more likely chance of being caught before detonation. Some have speculated that because this particular area of New York City has a reputation as a neighborhood with lots of gays and lesbians, the attacker may have wanted to target them. But the perpetrator also could have easily put his bombs closer to a gay club or other targets more closely associated with the group. What he's doing here, I think Jim Garrity does a good job, is helping you begin to use some common sense, which if you're in police work or if you're an investigator, you think through. But if you're an advocate, an ideologue, or somebody just trying to use your particular group as a victim at that point, for example, in this case that we're talking about, that you're not really thinking through what this means. But he goes on to say that it's entirely possible that the perpetrator's thinking had no coherence and the selection of the targets only makes sense to him, or the randomness may be the point. He wanted to signal that no particular place is safe. But he also may have known the neighborhood well enough to be confident that he could place bombs in these locations without arousing suspicion, or that they would be unlikely to be discovered before detonation. The security camera footage and eyewitness accounts from last night's described white smoke, and of course remember the white smoke from the Boston Marathon. The bombs in the Boston Marathon attack used black powder from fireworks and nitrate and other kinds of oxidizers. The FBI and ATF almost certainly now know whether the bomb components were those similar to what was used in Boston. The Sarnoff said they learned how to build a pressure cooker bomb from what? Al-Qaeda's magazine Inspire. It's worth noting that investigators never determined whether the Sarnoffs built the bomb, and in court filings suggested the brothers may have had help building the bomb, yet searches of the residency, 3 vehicles, and other locations associated with them yielded no traces of black powder, again strongly suggesting that others had built or at least helped the Sarnoffs build the bombs and thus might have been able to build more. The same kind of concerns that surfaced out of the Boston Marathon bombing are going to surface here. We don't know a little bit about this man. When we come back, we'll talk about him, but also love to get your thoughts. What about this weekend of terror? Do you have some thoughts about what we should do and how this might even affect the presidential election? We'd love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Over the last few weeks on my radio program, I've talked about the plans by this administration to give away U.S. control of the Internet in less than 2 weeks. On October 1st, the transition will take place, even though Congress has twice voted to block this transition. Republican lawmakers have warned that the administration's plan to relinquish its authority could give authoritarian countries like China and Russia an opening to make an online power grab. That is why some U.S. senators are trying to put up roadblocks. Senator Ted Cruz believes the proposed giveaway would cause irreparable damage, and this would bring havoc not only on our nation but on free speech across the world. Senator John Thune has proposed language to delay the transition that could be attached to the continuing resolution to fund the government. He doesn't think the foundation has been appropriately laid for the transition and feels that it hasn't been properly vetted. Senator Jerry Moran believes the transition should not move forward until our many concerns have been addressed. He added, there won't be a second chance to get this right. Now, some argue that this transition will have no practical effect on how the Internet operates. For the near term, that's probably true. However, Judith Bergman of the Gatestone Institute says that if you look at the UN's Geneva Declaration of Principles, you will see that the United Nations have particular designs on taking over the Internet. Bergman argues that the giveaway could spell the end of the current era of free speech on the Internet as well as free enterprise. Gordon Kravitz, writing in the Wall Street Journal, says that the only thing worse than a monopoly overseen by the U.S. government is a monopoly overseen by no one or a web-censored UN. That's why Congress should not let this administration give up control of the Internet on September 30th. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. pointofview.net. Point of View, Truth Team 360, Dr. Sean McDowell.
We clearly live in difficult times, especially for Christians. Sometimes it feels like the culture is just turning against us quickly. We need to speak up with compassion, but we need to speak up with truth in the way that Jesus did. That's one reason why I'm a big fan of Point of View, is they're dealing with cutting-edge, controversial subjects that the church sometimes doesn't want to deal with. But they do their homework, they do it informed, they also do it in a way that's practical so we understand the issues but know what we can do about them. Ministries like Point of View can only survive with the help of listeners. One of the reasons I think Point of View is so valuable is because they just deal with the cutting issues of the day in a manner that's informed, in a manner that's gracious, and in a manner that's making a difference. Point of View is standing up for truth and they need your help.
Point of View, Truth Team 360.
Sean McDowell, and last week, of course, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday did our Truth Team 360, and some of you might want to know how we did, and each day we made our match, but just barely, and so there's still room for you if you would like to join with us. We're still challenging some of you as we go along to consider what you might do. Support us for as little as $1 a day, $30 a month, $360 a year, and again, you can go to the website, pointofview.net. We have a banner there, and of course, we've given out that pledge line number in the past, 800-347-5151. Talking today about Terror Weekend, and if you would like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. It's a different number, obviously. That's the on-air number. And before we take some phone calls, let me just talk a little bit more about the suspect. First of all, there were 5 people of interest taken into custody on Sunday, but the target of all of this, the, if you will, prime suspect, is a man by the name of Ahmad Khan Rahami. And again, he is, interestingly enough, a naturalized U.S. citizen who was born in Afghanistan. Now, sometimes when you have these terrorists, if the police kill them, you go, well, that's just one less to put through the court system. But in this case, I was hoping, and it looks like he will survive his gunshot wounds, that we find out a little bit more. This may be one of those very few times where I think it might be helpful to know, did he come over here with the intent of being a jihadist? Or did he come over here and wanted to embrace the American experience and then later became radicalized? And who other people might have helped him? Because as I read to you just a minute ago from some of the material from Jim Garrity and some of the others that people have been writing about, there are a number of people that are saying, whether you look at the Sarnoff brothers in Boston or whether you look at Ahmad Khan Rahami, they don't really look like they're bomb makers per se. And so are there some other people, perhaps part of a jihadist network, providing the expertise or even providing the bombs for these individuals? Now, he actually, at least his last known address is in Elizabeth, New Jersey. And let's recognize that we also had 5 bombs that were found in a backpack near New Jersey train station. One exploded, interesting enough, when the bomb squad robot tried to disarm it. So you have a number of these simultaneously, and so there are all sorts of questions that need to sort of be resolved there as well. And as the Wall Street Journal reported as well, counterterrorism agents were combing through some of the videos trying to find these individuals. And the real concern is, how far does this go? How many people are involved in this? And I think over the next couple of days, we'll certainly understand a little bit more about that blast. As far as we know, no one was killed. There were 29 that were injured. But this is certainly something of great concern. And before I start taking some phone calls, I mentioned the other part of this story. And this is the story that comes out of Minnesota. On Saturday night, a man dressed in a private security uniform went on a stabbing spree inside the mall there in St. Cloud, Minnesota. He injured 8 people, according to the St. Cloud Times. All 8 were sent to the hospital. 5 were discharged. 3 were, at least at this report, remain hospitalized. And then the St. Cloud police chief, Blair Anderson, said the victims were stabbed by a man, again, dressed in a private security uniform. And if it weren't for an off-duty police officer from another jurisdiction who shot and killed the attacker, he might have done a great deal more. And so we certainly want to give all sorts of credit to the individual who actually prevented this carnage from getting any worse, and that is Jason Falconer. Turns out that he is a USPSA shooter. He actually plays 3-gun, which is where you shoot a shotgun, a rifle, and a handgun. He's an NRA certified firearms instructor, and he's the one who shot and killed the Somali immigrant who was stabbing people there at the St. Cloud, Minnesota mall. So once again, we see the value of having trained individuals. In this particular case, an individual that is an NRA certified firearms instructor who was able as an off-duty officer to prevent this from being any worse than it was. Lots of issues to talk about today, so we're going to give you as many opportunities as you might want to take. Let's go first to the state of Texas, KBJS. John, you have the floor. What would you like to add?
Oh, yes, sir. Hi, Kerby. I just wanted to point out that when my wife and I were originally watching this news item, how, in my opinion, how the political correctness just swarmed over, where he was from and his nationality. They were first reporting, and this was on CNN, where they said that he was an American naturalized from Afghanistan. And then later on, they started reporting, no, he's an American, and but his background, his ethnic background, is Afghani. And there's a big difference, because this goes back to what we've been saying before about using common sense. We feel greatly for the refugees coming into this country. However, if they're coming from a country whose records, whose government has been destroyed, as is the case from, these where some of these people are coming from, we cannot let emotion overtake our common sense. And we have to be vigilant about who is coming into the country and are their records, can they be vetted, And if they can't, we have to have some humane way of setting them aside and saying, look, let's find out who you are first. And I think that's exactly what everybody wants to do, is make sure that, we enjoy, the United States. We have a great country, number one in the world. And when you go to these other countries and come back, you go, God, thank God I'm back in the United States. And anyway, that was just my comment about how fast, in my opinion, the political correctness was going on. And I think that's disturbing the American people, because it's not reporting the truth. And there's a big difference.
Certainly agree with you. Yeah, certainly do agree with you about political correctness. And when I first heard this, I thought that, the story is terrorism. The more I've found out, there's two other stories. One I've put on the table a little bit on this political correctness, where the people in positions of authority could not speak truthfully about it. And then I can see one of my callers is going to get me into my third point, and that is how the media has covered for some of those individuals, which we'll get to in just a minute. So you've certainly started us in that second area there, where if you, again, for our listeners out there, and they say, how is it that Donald Trump became the nominee? Well, whether it's Donald Trump or even early on how Ben Carson really captured everybody's attention, it was that they were, and they're not the only ones, but they were certainly talking about how dangerous political correctness is. If you cannot say with any kind of truthfulness who the perpetrator is, where they came from, what their motives are, if words like Islamic radical or Islamic terrorists are just words that cannot come out of your mouth, you've got a problem, and that's not our problem. It's the problem of the person that's not telling the truth.
Right, and this is America. This is freedom of expression, and you might not like what I had to say, but you should. Everybody should have the respect of each other to civilly listen to each other and debate it without going into emotion and trying to do anything illegal. But for crying out loud, this PC has gone so far to the point where now. It's to me, in my opinion, it seems that freedom of expression is starting to take some hits.
Very good point. John, thank you for calling. Call back again. We are
Kerby.
coming to a break here, so I see a number of calls. You just wait a few minutes, and we'll get to you right after the break, because we've talked about, the terrorist action, and this has been kind of a terror weekend. Certainly, John once again emphasized and kind of reinforced some of the comments I made about political correctness. But when we come back, after I take a few more phone calls, I want to get into how the media has not served us well. For example, to take a trivia one, Hillary Clinton looked like somebody just woke up from a rest and just didn't really seem to be very concerned. She made some statements about the killings, the bombing, I should say, and the explosions, I guess is what they first called them, explosions, and then bombing. And then this hashtag zombie Hillary went around, and then, of course, Twitter decided to pull that. And when she had used the word bombing, one of the news organizations even pulled bombing out and then criticized Donald Trump for calling it a bombing. So there is all sorts of media issues we need to get into as well. But we do need to take a break. And as we do so, I would still want to challenge a few of you, if you've not joined with us at Truth Team 360, we certainly would appreciate your financial support. And you can go to our website, pointofview.net, and join up with us. We'll take some more phone calls right after this.
This is an incredibly important week for Point of View. We need to build our war chest to get us through the election season. This week, we need you to step up and join the team. Just as a political campaign cannot get its message out without donor support, Point of View must have friends like you as we head into the final leg of this presidential race. Imagine Hillary Clinton in the White House. Think of what justices she would nominate to the Supreme Court. The next president is likely going to shape our highest court for several decades. And Point of View wants to provide a biblical perspective of all of the issues in this year's campaign. But we cannot do it. We simply can't without you. Please step up now as a monthly partner. Click the Join the Truth Team button at pointofview.net and choose your level. Stretch a bit or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Talking about another terror weekend, and we've looked at what has been happening in New York and New Jersey, as well as Minnesota. And I want to get into some of the way in which the media has, in some cases, accurately, but most cases poorly covered this. But let's take another phone call first. Go to South Carolina, WLPE. Beverly, what would you like to add to our conversation? See if we can get Beverly on. Beverly, are you there? I will put Beverly on hold for just a minute. Let's go out to Georgia, WLPG, and Sheldon. What would you like to say?
Yes, sir. I appreciate y'all's show. Listen to Focus on the Family, Family Talk with Mr. James Dobson, many others. And, you know, Mr. Trump, he says, you know, you got to vet these people, whatever that means, you know, figure them out and all that.
Sure.
But the Democrats, I think, is the ones that want to let all these people come over here, these foreigners. And it probably feels like the American Indians did when our ancestors come over here. I'm part Seminole Indian myself. But
you were there greeting them when they got off the boat, huh? Your ancestors. Yeah.
Ancestors. But anyway, this dude, man, I'm disabled. My daddy was a Marine in the Korean War in the Chosin Reservoir. Uh-huh. And I'm disabled. I can't even get health care. And this dude that tried to kill people in New York the other day, he gets shot so he gets health care. And I'm not a cruel person, but, you know, eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, the Bible says in the Old Testament. Sure. You know, and the grace of God and Jesus Christ.
Well, let me just encourage our listeners to pray for you, Sheldon, because I think that's what we need to do is pray for you. And maybe someone in Georgia could even provide some help, maybe working through your station, WLPG. If you want to maybe call the station later, let's see if somebody in your area could maybe give you some guidance or some help there locally. So anybody who would like to call into that station and leave a message, then Sheldon could call on there, and maybe you could connect up and help him out, because I'm all about doing what we can to reach out to our fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. Let me go back. I think I now have Beverly in South Carolina, WLPE. Beverly, thank you for calling today.
Thank you for taking my call. Good afternoon.
Yes.
Just wanted to make a comment. I do believe that as Christians, God has called us to pray for those in authority. And I try to make that part of my daily prayers, to pray for President Barack Obama, pray for all of these candidates, and specifically even the health issues of Hillary Clinton right now, for Donald Trump, for him to have sustaining health throughout these next weeks and months. And I'm just saddened by the acts that have occurred in our country over the weekend. And I do believe that as Christians, it is time for us to step up to the plate to make it a verbal confirmation to others that we are standing behind the person who seems to have the best interest of this country at heart, that we need to take very seriously what has happened, that the media quit vacillating, and that we make sure that when it is an act of terrorism, that we call it what it is and not whitewash anything. And lay aside anything that would be of racial issues or anything else. It is time for America to say we're going to stand for what is right and to quit compromising, because that is why we are in the shape that we are currently in. And for the reasons that I, as a Christian, I do believe that Donald Trump is under the advisement of many evangelical leaders. I pray for those leaders as they counsel with him every day. And I think it's appalling to think that we have someone who is a candidate for the highest office in this country who has not been truthful to America in the issues that have occurred, as Secretary of State and perhaps in other areas as well. And it's not up to me to judge. I do not know what Hillary Clinton's heart is. But I am praying that one day that she will come to know that saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. And I am praying for Donald Trump as he goes up in this debate next week, in the coming weeks, as we wait for this election to take place. But it is time for America to stand. It is time for Christians to quit compromising, and it is time for us to stand for righteousness. So thank you for taking my comment.
Beverly, I appreciate you sharing that with us. Again, we've talked about a couple of issues. Of course, this terror weekend, we've talked just a little bit, certainly as we've talked with John just a few minutes ago about political correctness. And both these callers kind of also lead me into the third point I wanted to make, and that is we haven't been very well served by some of those people in the press. Now, again, it's you have to be careful because they talk about the fog of war. Well, there's sometimes the fog of a terrorist act. And that is you don't know all the details. And there are a lot of things, for example, that were said about the Orlando shooter that were not true, some of which I repeated because I was using their on the ground kind of observations, which turned out to be incorrect, so I understand that. But look at the fact of, for just a minute, to go to Minnesota. This is a place where there is a man who dressed up in a private security uniform and stabbed 8 people. Now, while he was doing that, he made references to Allah. During the attack, he even asked at least one person if that person was a Muslim, because he might have not stabbed that person. So you then have people going, well, really? Then you have the ISIS-run news agency that actually took credit for this and called him a soldier of the Islamic State. I think we have a pretty good idea of his motivation now, don't we? Well, this is the other part. Who stopped him? You probably have not heard the name of that individual because most of the time he was referred to as an off-duty police officer, Jason Falconer. Well, if you do even a little bit of research on who Jason Falconer is, he is, first of all, an individual that's an NRA certified firearms instructor. He shoots 3-gun. He is a USPSA shooter. But more than that, he's the owner of Tactical Advantage, which is actually a shooting range and does tactical training and focuses in large part on actually arming concealed carriers. He also was the chief of the Albany, Minnesota Police Department and is still, of course, a part-time officer. Well, all that kind of got left off somewhere along the line because, after all, that might look good for somebody being armed, being concealed carry, being maybe an NRA certified shooter. Are you seeing where we're going with this? That's just one of those. The one I mentioned just before the break, there have been a lot of people upset that they created a hashtag called Zombie Hillary, and they said that Twitter was censoring it. Well, you look at this a little bit more, it looks like really the autocomplete function was actually trying to change the spelling of Hillary to 1 L instead of 2, but nevertheless, there were some people talking about that, and of course, there was just an incredible amount of firestorm that came down on Donald Trump when he referred to it as a bombing. You can go back and find one of the video clips, if it's still out there on the internet, where Hillary called it a bombing, but then they edited it out because again, if you want to criticize one, you can't then have somebody saying the same word when you're criticizing Donald Trump. So there are lots of examples, and I could go into in more detail, but I don't think it would make much difference just to say that sometimes when the press covers these events, they don't cover them very well. And as we talked about just a minute ago, sometimes when we talk about our elected leaders, they sometimes don't speak the truth about some of those issues. And of course, Beverly and John and some of the others have brought that up as well. So when we come back from the break, I want to give a few more of you a chance to join our conversation. And again, this is not happening in a vacuum. We're in the midst of a presidential campaign. So shouldn't be surprised that some people criticize Donald Trump for jumping to a conclusion they think too quickly about the bombing. Or shouldn't be surprised that some people wanted to put out a hashtag called Zombie Hillary because she seemed kind of flat when she was giving a response to these attacks. And you know what? It's a political season. I expect a lot of that to take place, but nevertheless, I want to give some of you a chance to weigh in with a few of your comments. And then I might mention in the second hour, we're going to change topics. We can only talk about terrorism for so long, so I want to do some things that I think will be a real encouragement to do. A new book coming out called Undeniable, really how biology confirms our intuition that we're designed. So we're going to talk a little bit about design in nature and how even though evolutionists try to convince us that there's not design in nature, there's a lot of evidence at the molecular level as well as just the level that we see with our own eyes that shows design. So anyway, we're going to take a break. We'll take some more of those phone calls, though. I'd love to get your comments about this terror weekend, about the way the media has covered it, and the way our leaders have addressed the issue. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back with more right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Opulent Life Church in Holly Springs, Mississippi needed to move into a larger facility. The church discovered the perfect space for their new home, a storefront on the town square. But the city of Holly Springs would not give the growing church a permit to occupy the space unless 60% of the neighboring property owners within a quarter-mile radius of the church signed off on their presence. Now, you need to understand that this 60% rule only applied to Opulent Life Church. Restaurants, movie theaters, social clubs, they would be granted a permit to occupy the space without a question. But it seemed like the city of Holly Springs did not want this African-American religious congregation holding church on the town square. Cities sometimes try to use zoning laws to prevent houses of worship and religious ministries from spreading. Thankfully, Congress has passed a law designed to give churches a chance against discriminatory zoning ordinances. First Liberty Institute sued Holly Springs, and the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit said that Holly Springs had to present proof that it was not singling out houses of worship for unequal treatment just because it was a religious body. Well, the city could not meet its burden and were forced to change their policies. And today, if you visit Holly Springs, you might hear Reverend Telsa DeBerry leading his congregation in worship just off the town square. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Point of View. Truth Team 360.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for everybody on Point of View. I mean, you guys are all champions. The country needs your show. I support you. Again, thank you so much for everything that everyone in that room does. And that we need this show like you wouldn't believe.
I think Point of View is very worthy Christian ministry, and that people, listeners, should support support this ministry. I encourage everyone to do so who can.
My wife and I have listened to Point of View for about 17 years now. We just want you to know how much you have meant to us in our lives. I've gotten a real education since I've started listening to Point of View.
I just wanted to say thank you for your programs. I listen to you every day, and you're really my inspiration to do what I do at my church. I feel capable, mostly from what I learned from your programs.
I just want to commend you guys on your program. I love listening to you.
My husband and I are your supporters. We just really appreciate the show and the people you bring on.
Point of View. Truth Team 360.
Had a good week of Truth Team 360, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of last week. We're back into all, of course, the news, but if you would want to join with us, we certainly have some financial needs, and again, it's as simple as clicking on the banner at pointofview.net. Of course, we have a pledge line number, 800-347-5151, and as I've said before, there's some welcome gifts we'd love to put in your hands to say thank you for joining with us financially. So please pray for this ministry, and if you can help us out financially, we would so greatly appreciate that, and I'll have more to say about it in just a minute. But let's go back to the phones, and we'll go to North Carolina this time, WLGP, and Andrea. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Kerby, thanks so much. This is an important, you just made some pretty powerful statements about the media not being quite as truthful as perhaps they should be, and with terror, I didn't want to call it terror either. I didn't want to call it that. I did my documentary thing. Like you said, you can't talk about terrorism but so long as a Christian, but I just hate for it to be made light of, and I think you've well said it. Now, because it's a campaign, I think that's pretty much what you said. Indirectly, you said, it's political now. There's, we're less than 8 weeks away from having a new president, right, Kerby?
And we're a week away from the first debates, and it'll be interesting to see what they say about this terror weekend next Monday. Yeah.
They don't want to talk about it, but I really, I'm with you. I'm with you, what you're saying, and I really appreciate you coming out and having the boldness and the courage to say it on the air, because I just really didn't want to, I just don't want to hear about another bombing. I don't want to, the Boston Marathon thing, tax day, actually, 2013, even you remember, don't you, that the uncle and the parents, how embarrassed they were. It was on TV.
Sure.
I remember seeing the uncle. Remember that? I mean, I don't know. I watched that. I don't watch television very much, but I watched that uncle. He said, turn yourself in. Turn yourself in. And it's just so sad because here's a young fella, that was actually doing pretty well. His brother was killed. They find him in a boat bleeding,
Yeah.
I mean, but it's just, the recruiting, but they just go on. And I don't know what you did at home or, how you dealt with 9/11 this year personally, but privately, I really did give it the time it needed and sacredly, because it's sacred to me. But then I had to let it go. And anyway, all right, I appreciate what you're doing, man. Thanks.
Thank you. And you said that about the uncles, just if we do a contrast, say, between the Boston bombing and then, of course, the shooting in Orlando. Remember, the father of the shooter in Orlando shows up a week or two later at the Hillary Clinton rally, sitting right behind her. Do you remember that? I mean, that was odd. I mean, compared to kind of the shame that the family had in Boston area when they had the two kids that were the bombers. And again, you've got to recognize we're talking about bombings again. I mean, I'm sure there are going to be some people that are going to be saying, well, not only should we ban guns, we should ban pressure cookers or whatever. I mean, whatever an individual has at his or her disposal may be enough for them to wreak havoc. And in this particular case, we think that the primary responsibility is with Ahmad Khan Rouhani. And, of course, the name, I can't find it, nor do I usually like to give them out anyway, of terrorists in the one in Minnesota. But let's take a few more phone calls real quickly, because we do have a few more of you that'd like to weigh in with your comments. 1-800-351-1212. Well, I'll go to Eddie this time in Texas. Thank you for calling. Eddie, you there?
Oh, yes, I'm here. I just want to make sure it was me you were talking to.
Sure, you have the floor, so help me out here.
Well, listen, I wanted to address your comment regarding all of the training and certifications the officer had that stopped the violence.
Yes, this
in
is
New York in the mall.
Jason Falconer. I mean, this is amazing. This guy in Minnesota, again, owner of Tactical Advantage and NRA certified firearms instructor. Also had been, and of course they refer to him as a part-time officer. Well, yeah, but he was actually the police chief. So once you find out a little bit more about him, he's quite an individual. But go ahead, you might have some comments. So I want to give you the floor.
My comment is I'm 62 years old and I'm an NRA member. I was an NRA instructor. I'm taught lady self-defense, and I'm still, what would be considered as NRA an expert shooter. So and I carry myself. So I'm really confused at what difference does it make whether he had certifications or not.
What I'm saying is the mainstream press did not cover any of that. Everything I've just told you, all they say is he was a off-duty police officer. But when you look at all of this, you realize how much more qualified he was, and really what really kind of an outstanding individual he was. So the point is, the press doesn't ever like to use the word NRA, so they left that out. They really didn't want to give you too much more about the fact that he was an owner of Tactical Advantage because, he's got a gun show. So they just tried to minimize his bio, if you will. That's the point I was making. You see what I'm saying?
All right. Well, I understand completely and agree with you.
Figured you probably did. Yeah, maybe I didn't. Maybe I say things too fast for some people, but the point I'm making is that the press, if they could, would de-emphasize the ethnic background of the shooters or the stabbers. I think you found out that the person that was doing the stabbing in Minnesota was Somali, but sometimes you wouldn't find that out right away. And they also de-emphasize the incredible training and background that Jason Falconer had, because, again, they didn't want to talk about that. They didn't want to talk about the fact that because this guy was carrying, concealed carry, and because he trains other people to do concealed carry, he probably prevented what could have been a really major disaster right there in the mall. So if anything else, I think it's a very good argument for concealed carry. So you know what? The mainstream press didn't really cover very much of that. Then when we get into the one in, and I think it's the same guy, New Jersey and New York, but we'll just look at the one in New York because we at least think it's Ahmaud Rahami. Again, they sometimes said he was Afghani, but then since he was naturalized, most of the time they just said he's an American. Well, yeah, he's a naturalized American from Afghanistan, and so the point I'm making is that sometimes we're not well served by those people in positions of authority because they use political correctness, and sometimes we're not served well by the media. And if nothing else, I hope that's a case being made for why you should listen to Point of View, and why I at least hope some of you would consider what you might do to support Point of View. Last week, we talked about the fact, again, that we have less than 1% of all the audience that has ever sent a gift into Point of View. And if you're one of those 99%, maybe sometime I would encourage you to go to our website. We have a donate button. We have the Truth Team 360 button. And just send something just to say, hey, I appreciate the fact that you're trying to give me news and information and commentary that I hear nowhere else. And if that's helpful, then please go to the website, pointofview.net. Also, of course, we have a pledge line, 800-347-5151, if anybody'd like to call and talk to someone here. We'll be back and talk about intelligent design. That coming up right after this.
Former White House policy advisor Gary Bauer.
It's only by listening to things like Point of View that Americans find out what the ultimate agenda is. What we've all got to do is make sure programs like yours and this network continue to thrive, because that's the only way millions of Americans are going to find out the information that they need.
And the way to ensure Point of View Radio thrives is by going online right now or picking up the phone to join Truth Team 360. We bring information, wisdom, and encouragement to help you take action for the good of this community and the nation. Go online now to pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Select your giving amount, choose your gift, stand together with people all across the land on Truth Team 360. Pointofview.net/team. Join Truth Team 360 by phone 1-800-347 5151 or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour we're going to spend some time coming back to a topic we address on a pretty regular basis, this issue of intelligent design. How do we think about this? And this is a fascinating new book, so I wanted you to be aware of this and have a chance to hear from the author. The book is called Undeniable: How Biology Confirms Our Intuition That Life is Designed. Now, you are well aware of the fact that when we look at life, whether in the telescope or in the microscope or just around us, we do see evidence for design. Romans 1 tells us that as well. Now, our evolutionary friends have said, well, it just looks designed, but actually it is the blind watchmaker that provides all of this. And so what to you looks like design is really the result of mass, energy, chance, and time. And these chemicals come together, these planetary systems come together. Matter of fact, you come together as a result of just basically neo-Darwinian evolution. Well, is that true? And this is why I think this book is going to be so fun for us to work our way through. Undeniable: How Biology Confirms Our Intuition. And we have information about it on our website. And of course, we have information about our guest, who is the author of the book, Dr. Douglas Axe, who is the director of the Biologic Institute, which is actually a non-profit research organization launched by the Discovery Institute. Now, you know, again, we've talked many times with people like Stephen Meyer and others of the Discovery Institute. Did his undergraduate work at the University of California at Berkeley, got his doctoral work at Caltech, held postdoctoral and research positions at the University of Cambridge, as well as a number of institutions over there as well. And he has a very interesting background, but let me, first of all, welcome to the program today, Dr. Axe. Thank you for joining us today on Point of View.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Let's talk about your background, because you have a background both in engineering and in kind of the biological sciences, and your background is really key in some ways to understanding why you do your research and how you even came to write that book. So give us a little bit of a thumbnail sketch.
I think it is key, and it's not that I planned it out that way. I think someone else planned it, but early on, I was not, from high school on, I was not very, or at least coming right out of high school, I was not interested in the life sciences, much more interested in the physical sciences, but also somewhat practically minded, so I decided to major in chemical engineering at UC Berkeley, and did well there, and was advised that I should look at graduate school, and got into Caltech. And when I was looking at what I could do a PhD in, I had several options available, and that's when the life sciences, particularly biochemical engineering, became attractive to me. And so I started taking courses in the life sciences for the first time since high school, and I found that what looked like a boring subject to me when I was, I don't know, a sophomore in high school was amazingly interesting subject when you look at it at the molecular level. And what made it more amazing and intriguing and attractive to me was the connections that I was seeing between life at the molecular level and some of the engineering principles I had learned as an undergraduate. And at the same time, I had been a believer for a few years going into my undergraduate studies at Berkeley, and was encountering this clash of worldviews, my own worldview received from Scripture, and a clearly antithetical worldview that was putting itself in tension with the Christian worldview, and that was coming through loud and clear in lectures in the physical sciences at Berkeley and at Caltech. The Darwinian worldview, the materialist worldview, which is the bigger wrapper that Darwinism lives in, this idea that there is nothing but atoms and molecules, matter and energy. And so I was seeking direction as to what I should do with my career, and the idea of bringing these two things together, engineering and the life sciences, and putting forward a technical challenge, a test of Darwin's idea, became extremely attractive to me, and that's the way I felt led to go, and that's the way I did go.
I might just mention that we have information about the book as well as a link to the website undeniabledesign.com. You don't have to write all that out. We have a link to it, and that will tell you more about the book. The author has some videos and a way which you can purchase it, so we've made it really easy for you to find that. And again, like most individuals, like myself, who have graduate degrees in science, you have to very quickly kind of figure out, how do I sort out the biblical material that we have in my scientific endeavor. And of course, we're going to kind of work our way through it. But I love what Michael Behe says about your book. From childhood, everyone directly grasps that life is designed until they're talked out of it by a culture saturated with materialism. This excellent book clearly and concisely explains why your first understanding was exactly right. Dr. Axe shows why you don't have to be an expert to trust your firm knowledge of the wonderful design of life. And sometimes when I speak, I use an example that if you were just simply to be hiking in the Black Hills in South Dakota, and you were to come upon Mount Rushmore, even if you didn't know who Gutzon Borgman was that sculpted that, your intuition would tell you instantaneously that this is not a result of erosion. This is not a result of wind and rain effects on the stones. There is too much detail in that. And yet, when we come to the simplest living cell, in terms of the information, the bits and bytes and the detail, and the things that Michael Behe talks about in his book, and that certainly we've had people like Stephen Meyer talk about, and in the past when we've had Philip Johnson on and others, those are even more complex. And so intuitively, don't we, Douglas, have at least some sense that even before we get into some of the technical detail, that our intuition was indeed right, that indeed there is design that is all around us. Any thoughts? Maybe I've lost Douglas, so we'll see if we can get him back, and we're coming to a break anyway, so that would be a good time to do so. So, again, if you would want to join the conversation a bit later, we'll get into that. And the book, as I mentioned before, is called Undeniable, How Biology Confirms Our Intuition That Life is Designed, as I said just a minute ago, quoted from Michael Behe, who I think points out that really from the time we were born in childhood, we've certainly had this idea that the life is designed, that the world shows evidence of design. William Paley used to develop this idea, who was both a philosopher and a pastor, of the fact that if you came upon a watch, you would assume there's a watchmaker. Likewise, now you've had even people that are atheists try to suggest, well, yes, it looks like you need a watchmaker to make the watch, but really it's a blind watchmaker. It's really just the natural evolutionary processes that are giving us the kind of design that we see in nature. So let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll see if we can connect up with Douglas Axe. If you just joined us, talking about some fascinating research that he has been doing at what's called the Biologic Institute, which is a nonprofit organization which was launched a number of years ago by the Discovery Institute. Individual with both engineering background as well as biological background, and so we're going to spend some time, if we can, getting into those issues, and if we can not connect up with him, we'll just move back to some of the issues in the news. Lots of things going on, but let's take a break, and we'll come back and give you a chance to join the conversation and continue to hear some pretty good evidence for design. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Over the last few weeks on my radio program, I've talked about the plans by this administration to give away U.S. control of the Internet in less than 2 weeks. On October 1st, the transition will take place, even though Congress has twice voted to block this transition. Republican lawmakers have warned that the administration's plan to relinquish its authority could give authoritarian countries like China and Russia an opening to make an online power grab. That is why some U.S. senators are trying to put up roadblocks. Senator Ted Cruz believes the proposed giveaway would cause irreparable damage, and this would bring havoc not only on our nation but on free speech across the world. Senator John Thune has proposed language to delay the transition that could be attached to the continuing resolution to fund the government. He doesn't think the foundation has been appropriately laid for the transition and feels that it hasn't been properly vetted. Senator Jerry Moran believes the transition should not move forward until our many concerns have been addressed. He added, there won't be a second chance to get this right. Now, some argue that this transition will have no practical effect on how the Internet operates. For the near term, that's probably true. However, Judith Bergman of the Gatestone Institute says that if you look at the UN's Geneva Declaration of Principles, you will see that the United Nations have particular designs on taking over the Internet. Bergman argues that the giveaway could spell the end of the current era of free speech on the Internet as well as free enterprise. Gordon Kravitz, writing in the Wall Street Journal, says that the only thing worse than a monopoly overseen by the U.S. government is a monopoly overseen by no one, or a web-censored UN. That's why Congress should not let this administration give up control of the Internet on September 30th. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. pointofview.net. Point of View, Truth Team 360, Dr. Sean McDowell.
We clearly live in difficult times, especially for Christians. Sometimes it feels like the culture is just turning against us quickly. We need to speak up with compassion, but we need to speak up with truth in the way that Jesus did. That's one reason why I'm a big fan of Point of View, is they're dealing with cutting-edge, controversial subjects that the church sometimes doesn't want to deal with. But they do their homework, they do it informed. They also do it in a way that's practical so we understand the issues but know what we can do about them. Ministries like Point of View can only survive with the help of listeners. One of the reasons I think Point of View is so valuable is because they just deal with the cutting issues of the day in a manner that's informed, in a manner that's gracious, and in a manner that's making a difference. Point of View is standing up for truth, and they need your help.
Point of View, Truth Team 360.
Dr. Sean McDowell talking about the importance of supporting this ministry. And last week, of course, we had Truth Team. And if you still would like to join with us, we still have a need, and certainly that would be appreciated. Visit our website, pointofview.net. You can click on the banner that says Join the Truth Team, and you can join at whatever level you might specify. There's a number of welcome gifts there as well. And, of course, we have a pledge line number, which I've given before, and I will do again. All of it supporting these kinds of conversations as we're today talking about intelligent design. You know, I've been doing this program really since about 1986, off and on, sometimes as a guest host when Marlon Maddox was the host, later on as a host, and over 30 years. Every once in a while, we lose a phone line. It happens about once a year, and it just happened, which illustrates, if nothing else, that we're doing live shows. I did tape a program last Friday with Chuck Swindoll, which we'll play later on, but almost all of these are live. So, Dr. Douglas Axe, sorry for losing you on the line, but let me, if I can, come back to your book, Undeniable: How Biology Confirms Our Intuition That Life is Design. You tell a story about when you were at Caltech. They had a final exam which asked about a particular molecule, which would be the most logical first living molecule. So you decided to kind of give an answer, but then you thought, maybe for extra credit, I'll tell why the answer is unconvincing. And you got your exam back, and it was deducted. Points were taken off. And I think it illustrates again that currently, because there has been such criticism of the evolutionary model, most people, even graduate students, are not supposed to question or show any resistance. They're supposed to simply accept what the dogma is, even though the answers are oftentimes quite lacking, aren't they?
Absolutely. Yeah, that was a situation where you would think that good teachers would encourage students who question things and think about them beyond the textbook explanation. But in that case, I found out that was not what was wanted at all.
But what you are finding is when you look at the microscope, and again, we've talked about some of these things where you see what's called irreducible complexity, is what Michael Behe calls it, or when you just look at the fact that we have a DNA code. Well, you know, if you have a code, you must have a code giver. If you have, you know, you're talking about RNA and DNA and all that, it's translated or it's replicated. It's amazing how many times biologists have to use language of intelligence to even explain what happens inside the cell.
That's absolutely true. In fact, Francis Crick, one of the co-discoverers of the double helix structure of DNA, is quoted as saying, he wrote in a book, I don't remember which book, biologists must constantly remind themselves that what they're looking at was not designed but rather evolved. So even someone who has spent a whole lifetime telling himself or herself that, no, these things are not designed to evolve, they have to constantly suppress that intuition and override it.
So again, one of the things that I find kind of interesting, it's early on in your book, is a correspondence you do with Barry Pavlovitz, I guess is how you say his name. And what it is that when you began to say, you know, I'm noticing some things here that don't necessarily jive with an evolutionary point of view, and you know, I've you know, kind of developed a little bit of a relationship with these people at the Discovery Institute. You actually reprint the kind of the text so you can see what he said and what you said. But it did strike me a little bit of, well, okay, are you going to come out and be one of those horrible people that believe in intelligent design, and you're being kind of evasive, you're kind of inconsistent? Talk about that for just a minute, because it shows that they're in the scientific community almost like kids on a playground. They're choosing up sides. Which side are you going to be on, Dr. Axe, is kind of what he was asking.
Yeah. It's very much like being bullied, sort of a professional version of being bullied. You don't get a black eye, but you might lose your job or your grant money or something like that. And this was in a very trying year for me, was 2002. I was working in the UK, and up until that point, intelligent design had not stirred as much controversy in England as it had stirred in the United States. But 2002 really changed that. There was at least one school, publicly funded school in England, that was teaching intelligent design along with evolution, and some parent or someone went ballistic, and it ended up being debated in the House of Commons. Tony Blair was fielding questions from people. It got very, very heated. And BBC Radio was doing things on intelligent design. Bill Dembski was being quoted all over the place, and things got very tense for me in my work situation. I tell the story in the book. Yes. But part of it was, even before this, back in 2000, there were people who were probing and contacting my employer and saying, did you know this person? Do you know who he's hanging out with? And he's hanging out with disreputable figures like William Dembski. Are you concerned about that? And that's the sort of email this was that I quote from Barry Pavlovitz, basically saying, something smells fishy here. Why don't you come out and tell the truth? And I give my reply as well, saying, I'm not hiding anything, but I don't like talking about work until it's done. And that was the dilemma for me. I was doing work with integrity, but these people, of course, they're not about the truth. They're not trying to find out what the true scientific answer is. They just want to get me in trouble so I can't finish the work. So that was my predicament.
Let's talk about the philosophy behind that, and then we'll get into some of the science. But I think it's important, especially for parents of young kids that are thinking of going off to college. And I really do want to encourage more Christians to go into the scientific realm, whether it's science, engineering, medicine, whatever it might be. We need it. But oftentimes the parents say, well, you're going to get evolution there. But what you sometimes get is not so much evolution as what you call in the book scientism. The belief that science is the only reliable source of truth, or materialism, the belief that the only thing out there is material. And it's those philosophies that are almost part of the hardwiring of a typical science professor at a university that's really the problem, because you and I both look at the data, but we look at it obviously different than the way an evolutionist does, because we recognize that there may be other explanations than the ones that he or she might permit. So explain what you mean by this idea of scientism.
Well, scientism, I think this all basically traces back to spiritual rebellion on the part of humanity, where if we go back to the design intuition, which I introduced early in the book, it's this idea that we all, when we look at life, intuit that it was designed by a godlike designer. This is acknowledged by secular professors of psychology. I quote some in the book. But if you don't like that intuition and you want to work against it, you have to come up with an alternative explanation. And I think this underlies Darwin's original work in 1859, and I think it underlies the rebellion against the truth ever since the fall. And so we find ourselves with an academy where it's not that everyone in the academy hates the truth or hates the idea of design. A lot of it is this effect of bullying that we just talked about. But there are leaders and very influential people in the academy who are opposed to the truth, and they want to uphold this false version of it. And I think that's what gave rise to Darwinism as kind of a key cornerstone of the alternative worldview. And materialism is a part of it, that there is nothing but atoms and molecules, matter and energy. And if that's true, if you assume that that's true, then the only path to truth would be science, because science is the endeavor by which we learn about atoms and molecules, matter and energy. Nobody disagrees with that. So really, if you close off the idea that there's anything but the physical universe, then you end up saying that science is the only path to the truth.
Yes.
Science cannot be known. The truth cannot be known by anything but science. You don't have to press on that idea very hard to see that it doesn't work, but that's what you get forced to if you take this sort of rebellious approach.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation today with Douglas Axe. One of the things he talks about in his book is what you might call the gaping hole in evolutionary theory. You hear about this idea of natural selection. Well, is that a creative process? Can it invent, or is it more of a conservative process? And we'll get into some more specifics, but we need to take a break, so let's do so. We'll come back with more right after these important messages.
Does point of view make any difference? I think Dr. Eric Walsh would say it does. Dr. Walsh was fired from his job as District Health Director for the state of Georgia, not because of anything he did or failed to do on the job, but because of sermons he preached in his local church. What does that have to do with point of view? Jeremy Dice of First Liberty is representing Dr. Walsh in his effort to correct this apparent injustice. And Jeremy Dice became an attorney specializing in defending religious liberty greatly because of what he learned listening to Point of View Radio as a child. That is the kind of difference you make when you support the Truth Team, but we can't make that difference without your help. Become a partner today in this important mission of speaking the truth in love. Click on Join the Truth Team at pointofview.net. Choose your giving level, stretch a bit. Please do it today. Pointofview.net. or call 800-347-5151. pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Privileged to have with us Dr. Douglas Axe. Again, his book is entitled Undeniable: How Biology Confirms Our Intuition That Life is Designed. And again, if you would like to follow a little bit of his story as well as some of the very good material here to once again understand that really since we were young children, we sort of had the sense that life is designed. We sort of had to be talked out of it by the way in which evolution is taught in the schools. And so this, I think, reinforces the idea that really what we intuitively know is indeed true. Let me get into an aspect, Dr. X, about the evolutionary view, because you have a section here where you talk about the fact that proteins are, not evolving and things like that. But one of the things I thought was kind of interesting is what you call the gaping hole in evolutionary theory. That evolution basically assumes that natural selection is going to be an inventive process. But natural selection really can only kind of hone in on that which is going to succeed. It doesn't give you any new information. Or as Paul Nelson, Dr. Paul Nelson, I think you might know him, he's been on the program, said, let's give Charles Darwin his due. In the 19th century, okay, he did come up with this idea of natural selection, but that only begins to keep the survival of the fittest. It doesn't show us where all this new information comes from, and you refer to that as the gaping hole in evolutionary theory. Please explain, if you might.
Sure. Or De Vries, back in the early 20th century, I think 1904, said, he quoted someone as saying that natural selection explains the survival of the fittest, but it does not explain the arrival of the fittest.
Yes.
So if you go all the way back to Darwin, 1859, although natural selection is a true phenomenon, it only talks about what happens after some beneficial feature exists in a population. The whole question of origins is how do those beneficial features come to exist? And natural selection cannot explain that because it only kicks in after these things are already there. And this is broadly acknowledged. It keeps coming up, and this term, arrival of the fittest, keeps coming up by people who are acknowledging that the origins problem, in fact, has not been solved in evolutionary biology. So On the Origin of Species was the title of Darwin's book, and that he did not explain, and it still hasn't been explained. That's what I refer to in the book as the gaping hole, this whole inability of the current evolutionary theory to explain the actual invention of new things.
Now, the other part of that we've talked about with Stephen Meyer in Darwin's Doubt and Others is even the origin of the first living cell. You have now had a chance to study this and to look at this from a biological point of view, a biochemical point of view, using both your chemical engineering background and your life science background. It seems to me that even the simplest living cell, simpler than we'd have right now, that would give us the origin of life, requires an enormous number of proteins all working simultaneously with each other, some kind of coding mechanism, at least RNA, if not DNA, and all the kinds of aspects, lipids, carbohydrates, and all that would give you anything like a living cell. We have an intuitive notion that an explosion in a print factory is not going to give you Webster's unabridged dictionary, or as one guest on the program said, a tornado through a junkyard doesn't give you a jet or an airplane. And so you know enough now, and we know a lot more about biology than certainly Charles Darwin did in 1859. It seems to me that the more we learn about these biological systems, the more difficult it seems to explain that from an evolutionary point of view, right?
Absolutely, and it's not. It is clearly, obviously, a problem to explain the origin of the first living cell that would be a DNA protein-based organism. But the problem is present as well at the origin of every new life form, because all of these new life forms require, again, new information, new genes, new proteins. And my work and the work of colleagues of mine over the past 25 years has looked at that smallest of problems, which is the invention of a single functioning molecular machine. Some of these do chemistry. They're called enzymes, but these protein molecules, long chains that fold up into special shapes that do tasks within the cells, evolution cannot explain the origin of new ones. It can't even, it seems, explain how an existing one would be retooled to do a different task. We looked at both of those problems. How would a new shape come about, and how would an existing shape be put to a new use? And in both of those cases, going to the lab and doing careful, extensive work, we find that the evolutionary story does not hold up.
If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Privileged to have with us today Dr. Douglas Axe. Let me go to Susan in Texas. Susan, you're on with Dr. Axe.
Yes, thanks for taking my call. I had an experience in college in an animal physiology class, and I was going to ask you if that applied to what you were saying a while ago about materialism. Had a physiology teacher who was teaching us, we were studying brain pathways, neural pathways in animals and people, and he was speaking about, instinct, the existence of instinct that everybody knows exists in birds that fly south for the winter, in sea turtles that hatch out of the egg and go straight to the water and they're blind. You know what I'm talking about, the things that are innate knowledge. And he said, well, if you can show me a neural pathway for it, I will believe in it. And finally, he got so many questions, everybody in this class raised their hand, whether they were Christian or not. Everybody knows, about instinct just by looking at the world. He said, finally, came out of his mouth, there is no such thing as instinct. He actually said that. And then everybody's hand went up because, of course, that's obviously not true. And I was wondering, is his motivation for saying that because if there is something innate that would be too close to someone who created it before it was born, why did he have that motivation to say such an untrue thing in a science class? Is that...
I wonder if he, I don't know for sure, but I wonder if he's trying to say that anything that sits on top of the material world, so we all recognize that there is a physical thing inside our physical skull called a physical brain, and no one's contesting that. But I don't believe that our brain actually thinks. I believe that our mind thinks, and God has created us with both a body and a spirit and a soul and a mind, and those are knit together in ways that I have no idea how it works, but when I think, it affects my body, and I'm not doing that. All I'm doing is thinking. So there are these two realms, and the non-physical sits above the physical, apparently. And I wonder if what he was...
Is that like a gift? Like Beethoven could see a symphony in his mind when he was 4 years old, and you can't find the neural pathway for that, so it doesn't exist, is what...
Absolutely. So I think what he's trying to say is we are machines, and our brain is is like the CPU. And it's true of a computer that if you can't see the steps of the CPU producing it, then the computer can't do it. But we are not analogous to computers. We are not just physical things. We have a spiritual.
That was his error. I thought maybe it was getting too close for inherent knowledge would be too close to a creator.
Well, that's what he's rejecting, Susan, I might just say we're going to come to a break here in just a minute, but if you'd like to read some more...
Thank you so much.
Let me just mention for you or anybody else out there that I wrote a piece, actually a week of radio programs. It's on the Probe website. So you go to probe.org, but it's called Mind, Soul, and Neuroethics because it gets us into all of that. And Dr. Axe, that's a little off track, but I'm going to come back to it because I'm recognizing more and more of these evolutionary psychologists and psychiatrists and others that are trying to deny the existence of a mind and a soul. They're trying to say that we're totally determined. And I'm seeing a lot of evolutionists saying that as well. And, of course, this one up there in the University of Chicago, he's arguing that, everything is predetermined. So, I've been having some fun saying, well, if it's all predetermined, then I was just biologically predetermined to believe in intelligent design. You were biologically predetermined in evolution. So why are you attacking me and criticizing me for that? Of course, he doesn't like that argument, but it's the problem that you have with individuals that start with that assumption that you just talked about of materialism. And then you eliminate mind and soul. So then pretty soon this guy was trying to even eliminate instinct because he did not want to go to the obvious conclusion. But we need to take a break. When we come back, thought we'd talk a little bit more about how to think this through, because at the beginning of life, you have a prebiotic soup, but you use a good example. What if you put together an alphabet soup and you turned on the heat, and then when you opened it up and found the lid, you found all sorts of instructions in there. Or maybe you stir your alphabet soup, or maybe you've got alphabets that are a cereal. I think they still make that available. And you see your name spelled out. What about that? Because it gets us back to what we know intuitively cannot happen. We also know from people like Bill Dembski and others that there are statistical reasons to know that it won't happen. So we'll continue our conversation, talking today about the book Undeniable with Dr. Douglas Axe. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Opulent Life Church in Holly Springs, Mississippi needed to move into a larger facility. The church discovered the perfect space for their new home, a storefront on the town square. But the city of Holly Springs would not give the growing church a permit to occupy the space unless 60% of the neighboring property owners within a quarter-mile radius of the church signed off on their presence. Now, you need to understand that this 60% rule only applied to Opulent Life Church. Restaurants, movie theaters, social clubs, they would be granted a permit to occupy the space without a question. But it seemed like the city of Holly Springs did not want this African-American religious congregation holding church on the town square. Cities sometimes try to use zoning laws to prevent houses of worship and religious ministries from spreading. Thankfully, Congress has passed a law designed to give churches a chance against discriminatory zoning ordinances. First Liberty Institute sued Holly Springs, and the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit said that Holly Springs had to present proof that it was not singling out houses of worship for unequal treatment just because it was a religious body. Well, the city could not meet its burden and were forced to change their policies. And today, if you visit Holly Springs, you might hear Reverend Telsa DeBerry leading his congregation in worship just off the town square. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Point of View. Truth Team 360.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for everybody on Point of View. I mean, you guys are all champions. The country needs your show. I support you. Again, thank you so much for everything that everyone in that room does. And we need this show like you wouldn't believe.
I think Point of View is very worthy Christian ministry, and that people, listeners, should support this ministry. I'll encourage everyone to do so who can.
My wife and I have listened to Point of View for about 17 years now. We just want you to know how much you have meant to us in our lives. I've gotten a real education since I've started listening to Point of View.
I just wanted to say thank you for your programs. I listen to you every day, and you're really my inspiration to do what I do at my church. I feel capable, mostly from what I learned from your programs.
I just want to commend you guys on your program. I love listening to you.
My husband and I are your supporters. We just really appreciate the show and the people you bring on.
Point of View. Truth Team 360.
Back once again as we talk for just a few more minutes with Dr. Douglas Axe. But again, if you have not joined with us at Truth Team 360, let me mention that pledge line number. It's a little different than the on-air number, 800-347-5151. Noticed a few people taking calls in case you did not have a chance to join with us during our Truth Team 360 event latter part of last week. And so again, just challenging you to consider what you might do with a one-time gift, or what we're really looking for is some of you that might say, I could probably come up with $1 a day, $30 a month, $360 a year. That's why we call it Truth Team 360. And you can be one of those kind of foundational individuals that help us bring these kinds of programs to you every day. And talking at the moment about this idea of intelligent design in this new book, Undeniable. Dr. Douglas Axe with us. And Dr. Axe, let's for just a minute talk about what you call the magician's hat. And that is, what went in, what came out must be magic, whether it's a hat and a rabbit in a hat, or whether it's alphabet soup and heat, or whether it's this idea of life spontaneously generating. It really helps us understand that in some cases we have to look at alternatives to what maybe we've been told is actually taking place. But kind of walk us through that for just a minute, because you help us think through why we should really seriously question some of the things we see in some of these textbooks.
Sure. What I was trying to do, really with the whole book, but in particular with that tool, the magician's hat, is give people who are not technically trained ways to understand this problem, ways to have confidence in their design intuition. So the idea with the hat is that once magician's hat, I've laid out the argument that shows you as a non-technical scientist how you can know that your intuition is correct and you can have some confidence in it. So by chapter 11, I say, well, what about these people who claim to have shown that Darwin's mechanism really does invent things? It really is as powerful as they say. It really can do things. And I'm claiming in chapter 11 that there really aren't any examples of that should convince you. And the magician's hat is it's a tool for allowing you to see that. So if a magician in front of an audience puts his or her hand in the hat and pulls out a rabbit, and apparently there was no rabbit in the hat before, that looks like magic, but we know that it isn't really, that somehow the rabbit was put in the hat and the hand that went in just grabbed a pre-existing rabbit out of the hat. Likewise, these demonstrations, if you don't worry too much about what happens inside the hat and just ask yourself what went in and what came out, I claim that for all of them, you can see that they are not doing something that looks like magic. An example, a very simple example, is one that Richard Dawkins gave in The Blind Watchmaker back in 1986, I think it was, where he took a gibberish string of letters, about 28 characters long, and he evolved it on his computer. This was back in Commodore 64 days, I think. And after 48 steps or something like that, he had a phrase from Shakespeare, "Methinks it is like a weasel." Okay, so don't worry about what his computer actually did. To use the hat, you simply say what went in and what came out. And what went in this case, was Richard Dawkins and his computer. And what came out was Richard Dawkins and his computer with "Methinks it is like a weasel" on the screen. Now, is there anything about that looks like magic happens? Of course not, because anyone who knows any Shakespeare would be capable of typing that Shakespearean phrase on their computer. So the claim that something amazing happened is seen not to be true if you apply the hat test. Nothing came out that is surprising or magical looking compared to what went in. Now, if these people who are trying to convince us that Darwin's theory works really took that test seriously, they would be looking for something that is as amazing as a lifeless planet going into the hat and a planet teeming with the life that we see today coming out of the hat. And as believers, we don't believe that's what happened. We know that God made that lifeless planet and then put life on that planet. So God is part of what went into the hat and part of what came out. That's not magic. That's the hand of God. But if you strip God away from it, you have what looks like magic. And so I'm saying, if that's what your claim is, then show us the magic.
Very good. You know, I might just mention this before we run out of time here that we have a link to undeniabledesign.com. That's where people can find out more about the book, more about you. But you also have a number of videos. And Dr. Axe, sometimes what I do is encourage our listeners to watch one of the videos and then maybe post it on their Facebook page. And so they could pull out one of those videos, play any or all of them, and then maybe put it on their Facebook page or their blog and see some of the conversation and really start a good conversation about this idea of how our intuition about life is really accurate. So again, I encourage people to go to your website, and if people would like to have you come and speak or get to know a little bit more about what you're doing in terms of the research, they can go to that website, can't they?
Absolutely, yeah. So there's info at undeniabledesign.com is an email address. You can shoot an email inquiries, and someone will be able to read all those, and we'll get responses out.
Might just mention, too, you have a Facebook place and a Twitter feed and also a YouTube link. So we have all of those available, too. So if people wanted to follow out a little bit more, either follow you personally or go through the Undeniable website, there's some material there as well. So Dr. Douglas Axe, thank you so very much for the work that you've done in this book, and thank you for giving us an hour today here on Point of View.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Again, these are individuals that are speaking to this very important issue of intelligent design. A lot of it, of course, is associated with the Discovery Institute. We've had a number of guests with us on that. And for those of you that were able to follow this, I think you'll find the book very helpful. But at the same time, he has a couple places where he gets a little more technical. So if you know of a young person or even a graduate that has some science background and would be maybe motivated to read a book like this and really be encouraged by it, let me also recommend that as well, because it gets into even more technical details than what we've covered today. And I recognize those of you with a biological background would greatly appreciate the work that they're doing. Just before we're out of time, let me mention that last week we did have, of course, our Truth Team 360. We really do encourage those of you that are listening to the program to support this ministry. That's a way in which, of course, we can continue bringing these programs to you. And as I've mentioned on more than one occasion, we have only a very, very small percentage of individuals that ever actually support this program. So I hope that you would be one of those. Later this week, we're going to be covering a number of other stories. Matter of fact, we have Gary Kinder in studio with us tomorrow, and an individual with him that has actually done a very good job, Evelyn Hines, about portraying Corey Ten Boom. So I think you'll enjoy not only some of the discussion about what's happening at Roaring Lambs, but also another opportunity to emphasize the arts. And so then we'll get back into some of the news because, of course, there's a lot going on, especially with this terror weekend. That's all we have for today. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Shamila for their help behind the scenes. Visit the website, pointofview.net. And if you'd still like to give us a call, the pledge line number, 800-347-5151. See you tomorrow.
The end of the book of Jonah is really strange. God said there were 120,000 people in Nineveh who didn't know their right hand from their left. And yet today in America, many of our major corporations and politicians are fighting a war to permit men to use women's showers and bathrooms. Once you deny God as the measure of all things, you can't even recognize the most basic realities. America is in a battle for its sanity and survival. We need strong voices to tell the truth. We need Point of View. Become a partner in this important mission of speaking truth in love. Please, today is the day. Click the Join the Truth Team button at pointofview.net. Choose your giving level. We've had a great start to this important week, and we need to keep it rolling. Take that step, pointofview.net, or call 800-347-5151. Join the Truth Team today, pointofview.net, or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.